Welcome to We're the We and We the People. I'm Dr. Cynthia Newton, Chair of History, Politics, and Society and Associate Professor of Political Science at Wesley College in Dover, Delaware. I'll be hosting today's program. But before we begin, let me tell you a couple things about the League of Women Voters, the organization sponsoring this series. The League of Women Voters is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization. They do not support particular political candidates or political parties, but do take stands on certain issues. After doing countless voter registration sessions and other events, they realized that most people don't know a lot about how our government works at the federal, state, and local level. Some of you may have never had a basic civics class, others may have had one and you've just kind of forgotten over time. Even some of our league members. So hopefully this provides some necessary insight and gives you a little bit of a refresher if you've forgotten a few things on the way. This series is funded in part by a grant from the Delaware Humanities. This segment is on the U.S. presidency. Now, obviously this is a very important topic. The president in the U.S. has a significant level of visibility, it has a significant role in the world, and the prominence of our presidential elections is huge in the U.S. and even internationally. And so it's important for citizens to understand the president's role, its limits, and even have realistic expectations of the person holding the office. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the Constitution and what the framers thought about this role in this office, what we look at beyond constitutional requirements for people that we want to be the U.S. president, their actual constitutional powers, and also the power that comes along with the strength of public opinion. I'm going to talk a little bit more about their domestic and international role, spend some time on how we actually elect the U.S. president, our electoral college system, a brief word about the vice presidency, and then bring it all back together for you. So looking at the U.S. Constitution, the executive branch is found in Article 2. Article 1 covers the legislative branch, and then Article 2 is on the executive branch, and more specifically the U.S. presidency. And this contains the role, qualifications, the powers, and how we elect this person. Now, the framers were concerned with too much power in one individual, concentrating that power, and tyranny, someone ruling too strongly over everyone. In fact, so concerned that 11 Federalist Papers and several of the Anti-Federalist Papers, these were a series of arguments that appeared in the New York papers and other papers in 1787 and 1788, arguing for or against various provisions of the new Constitution, addressing some of these things that they were concerned about with the U.S. presidency, the powers, the election processes, and creating too powerful of a president who would ultimately become a tyrant or a monarch. In the Constitution, in order to be the U.S. president, you need to be at least 35 years old. You need to be a natural-born U.S. citizen. There's been a lot of discussion about potentially changing that and amending the Constitution, but it has stayed this way because, going back to the framers' concern that someone that's not born in the U.S. might have loyalties somewhere else. So it's stayed as you have to be a natural-born U.S. citizen. You also need to have lived in the U.S. for at least 14 years. The term of office for the presidency is 4 years. The 22nd Amendment to the Constitution in 1951 limited the president to a maximum of 2 terms or 10 years total. And this was because of FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, being elected to 4 terms and then passing away during his 4th term in office, many thinking that this was too long and gave him far too much power. So a president can do the 2 terms and then also has the ability, because 10 years if they were part of another president's term that they needed to take over, that would give them a little bit more flexibility. Over time, we've seen a lot of evolving expectations of citizens, which have also affected the role and what we expect out of the president. In terms of more communication, more direct communication, access to the president, access to their private life and family. And the president's ability to significantly solve or address both domestic and international problems. So beyond the Constitution, beyond those minimal 3 requirements, Things we also look at in our candidates: their level of education, their age, can't be too young, can't be too old, their religion. This has been, obviously an issue of significant debate. Also including their race, their gender, even things that you wouldn't think matter, like their height and weight, influence the success of their candidacy. And certainly being associated with a major political party helps. And so what emerges as a final candidate pool is often people who can bridge all of those areas and also be supported by a major party and also have access to the donors and the wealth that comes along with it. So this makes a very small pool of truly viable candidates for the presidency. Additionally, media in our 24-hour media cycle, and with the growth of social media, they hold the president accountable to every word, every action, every appearance, what they wear, what they look like, what they do, and so that this also affects the president's actions. Let's look a little bit more at the powers of the president. First, constitutionally. Again, these are in Article 2. The president is commander-in-chief of the military and the militias. And in the modern era, we understand militias to be National Guard. The president can grant reprieves and pardons. And sometimes they do this while they're in office, but typically on their way out of office, they grant a lot of reprieves and pardons, sometimes very controversially. They also oversee the executive branch. And the executive branch has grown substantially as our nation has grown both in size and population. The president can negotiate treaties. Now, treaties ultimately do need to be ratified by the U.S. Senate, but again, over time, presidents have found other types of agreements that they can negotiate that do not need the role of the Senate. The president appoints ambassadors, Supreme Court judges, and various other executive branch officials, although these do ultimately need to be confirmed by the Senate as well. President can fill vacancies during congressional recesses. President can convene special joint sessions of Congress, receive ambassadors and other heads of state, faithfully execute the laws of the nation, and commission officers in the armed forces in that role as commander-in-chief. And this, again, these powers, even these basic listed ones, these have evolved and expanded with the growth of the nation, our connection to and the evolution of our role in the world, certainly the myriad issues and the number that have really grown and changed in their complexity, also the 24-hour media cycle, social media, citizen expectations and understanding of expecting more and more out of a president, and the influence of the party leaders. One thing worth noting is our role in the post-World War II world, that the president is expected to have more of a role, expected to be a more powerful executive, indeed is even referred to as the most powerful person in the world or the world leader, and this obviously brings a lot of heightened expectations of what they will do, say, and accomplish. Public opinion is one of the biggest sources of presidential power beyond the constitutional limits. It gives them leverage over Congress, gives them power and leverage in the states. Public opinion can even affect a president's actions and sometimes cause the administration to change their positions on issues or to address things that a majority of Americans want to see addressed. Now, the president has a significant role in the national policy agenda and keeping their campaign promises. These are the things that got them elected. They also stage rallies, attend speaking events, give interviews, give speeches, and even increasingly have a presence on social media. But presidents have to balance these with the needs and wishes of their party, of Congress, and they rarely accomplish all of their goals, especially if they have what's called divided government, meaning that one or both chambers of the legislature are not of the same political party that they are. Now, a president does submit a budget draft to Congress, which helps to communicate their wishes and priorities. Of course, Congress may significantly alter and change these, but nonetheless, it gets their voice out there. Additionally, when the president gives the annual State of the Union address, which providing a report to Congress on the State of the Union is required, but as radio and then television and now the internet have become big fixtures in our lives, presidents realize, hey, this is an opportunity for me to speak directly to the American people, and so presidents use it as a much bigger event and a way to talk directly to the American people to get their agenda and their priorities out there. Domestically, the president is seen as the party leader, indeed as the top person in their political party, as a unifier quite often, as the national voice, as a leader in crises and war, and then providing national guidance and serving as a figurehead both domestically and as we move internationally onto the international stage. In the rest of the world, the president is seen as the top U.S. representative and voice. So what the president says is, believed by many in the world to be speaking for all Americans and the nation. The president acts as a diplomat, hosts world leaders, hosts events and summits, also serves as a mediator and even a negotiator between either other nations and trying to come together with some type of international agreements or treaties. So all this of powers aside, let's look at how we actually elect our U.S. president. And our system is called the Electoral College system. There is no actual college where you would think of students and take classes and get a diploma and all that. It is our system, and it is a filtered and indirect system, and designed intentionally to be so. There was a concern among the framers of the popular passions of citizens and their ultimate knowledge in the issues and choosing the right candidates, and in Federalist Paper number 68, authored by Alexander Hamilton, he speaks about the need for an indirect system and the importance of having knowledgeable electors to make the selection of president because, again, it was such a big deal and that the average citizen might not have all the knowledge and things that they need. This system of how we elect the president is largely misunderstood or completely unknown by most Americans. They don't really know how it works. They may never have been taught or kind of glossed over it and didn't really absorb it, particularly since it's different than pretty much all the rest of elections in this country. Yet, our presidential elections get the most attention and the most money. And really, differences or the actual steps in the process are only pointed out or become a big issue or become a big controversy when how citizens vote in the popular vote and the Electoral College outcome differ. This has happened 4 times in our country: 1876, 1888, 2000, and most recently in 2016. So let's actually look at the process. First, the numbers. Currently, there are 538 possible total electoral votes. This number comes from 435 members of the House, 3 votes for the District of Columbia. We amended the Constitution to give the people that live in the District of Columbia a voice in voting for the president, and then 100 members of the Senate, 538 total. You need 270 electoral votes to win. The top 10 biggest states with the biggest populations control nearly 270 of these. This often and significantly affects how people campaign for the office because they spend time in the states that have the biggest payoff. So for example, you have states that become much more influential than others. California has 55 possible electoral votes, whereas smaller states like Delaware or Vermont only have 3. So candidates spend their time where the bigger prize is. Now, prior to Election Day, at the state level, the major parties, sometimes some of the third and minor parties do this, but we'll focus on the 2 major parties because they are the ones that are most successful in our election process generally. Each of those parties chooses electors. And these people that they choose are typically people that have been long-term members of the party, maybe large donors, big supporters, people that they know and think will be loyal to their party and to their candidates. because there are no laws requiring an elector to vote the way that their party wants them or expects them to. So you want to at least ensure in your selection that you've gotten the right people. And they choose electors in the total number of the congressional delegation of that state, so the total numbers of representatives and total numbers of senators. Then we get to Election Day, where the citizens vote on the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November. This is in the Constitution of when we vote. And whichever candidates, or whichever party's candidate wins the plurality of votes, their electors get activated. This is true in 48 of our states. Maine and Nebraska are the exception, and I'll speak briefly about them in a minute. So in early December, about 6 weeks after the election, the electors go to their various state capitals, so this happens all across the country on the same day, and they cast their votes for the presidency. And again, they are expected to vote for their party's candidate. If they choose not to, which does occasionally happen, but not too often, they're called a faithless elector. But they cast their votes, those votes are sealed and sent to D.C. The first week of January, there's a special joint session of Congress where all of the votes are opened and counted, and whichever candidate gets at least 270 becomes the next president. And this is when it's official. Now, despite our election night speculation and media coverage and all of that, we do not officially know who the next president will be until after the votes are counted at that joint session of Congress. And then this person is inaugurated on the 20th of January, again, which is also in the Constitution. Now, the framers thought, despite, how things turn out, the framers thought that there would be no clear winner that would emerge most of the time. They thought that, states would choose their local and their regional favorites, and so no clear winner would emerge, and that the vote would actually go to the House of Representatives. In reality, it's only happened twice, 1800 and 1824. So we don't even think about this as an option, but nonetheless, that is what happens if there is no clear winner. So briefly, Maine and Nebraska. Maine and Nebraska point out an interesting thing about our electoral process because they award their electoral votes proportionally by congressional district. And it highlights that states can have whatever procedure they choose for allocating the electoral votes. And so many have speculated that if more states did this, that this would significantly change our map and would significantly change how presidential candidates do campaign for office. So a brief word about the vice presidency. So leading up to presidential elections, we speculate a lot and weigh a lot on the choice of a vice presidential running mate. And people get really excited to be considered. We come up with lists of all possible candidates and what they could lend and what regional support or expertise. And then once they get elected and they become vice president and experience the reality of the office, many have said it's very empty. It's kind of a dead end. You kind of get forgotten about. And that, there's no guarantee that if you get elected vice president that you are going to become the president. And often you just kind of drift off into obscurity. By the Constitution, the vice president only has two functions. They serve as president of the Senate, where they can vote in the case of a tie. That doesn't happen a lot, and they don't preside over the Senate a lot, except usually in ceremonial or special circumstances. And then they serve as president if the president dies, resigns, or is unable to fulfill their duties of office. So to fill all the rest of that time, the vice president often does major projects. They work on specific initiatives that the president thinks are important. They make appearances on the president's behalf, or sometimes they work on their own projects or own initiatives. In 1804, we passed the 12th Amendment to the Constitution, which did clarify the procedure for vice presidents and vice presidents so that they actually ran and are voted as a ticket, so that we did not end up with a significant divide, which did happen in the presidential election of 1800. Additionally, the 25th Amendment, which was passed after the Kennedy assassination in 1963, addressed and clarified emergency succession, realizing that there wasn't as clear a process in place for when it happens very quickly and needs to change very quickly. So if the president can no longer do their role, and then the vice president takes over, but what if the vice president can't, or something else horrible happens? Well, then the Speaker of the House becomes president, then the president pro tempore of the Senate, then the Secretary of State, and then the heads of all the other cabinet departments in order by which they were established. Of course, if you get to the point where the very last cabinet office is president, something has gone horribly awry in this country. But nonetheless, the process is still there and is still essential. Now, bringing it all together, Americans have evolved, particularly after the Industrial Revolution and certainly after World War II, have an increasing view of corporate leadership and looking at one person as the leader, the CEO model, to solve everything. And so they've projected this onto government, even arguing that business people would be good elected as president because they would bring that more corporate model to government. And certainly we've seen the role and expectations both internally among members of government, but also among citizens, evolve and change, again, particularly since World War II, where it thrust the US into a different role in the world stage. The cost of running for the US presidency is over $1 billion per candidate, is the focus of so much media attention, so much hype, that it really has such a huge impact that American citizens should understand better, and hopefully this helps, of what the president does, what their role is, and how we actually elect this person. Thank you very much for your time.